We're bringing in Jeff Paterson from Securus and Price and RinkWide Vancouver. Hey, Jeff, good to see you. I don't know, has summer began for you after the Game 7 last night or no?
Yeah, what are we into? A couple of days here before we get back to NHL awards and the draft on the weekend and free agency. So round and around and around it goes. But hey, this year was a little different. The Canucks played till the May long weekend, Rod, which is something they haven't done in a long, long time. So the offseason has felt shorter, certainly, but a lot of anticipation and a busy week ahead for the Vancouver Canucks. They've got some key decisions to make on their own free agents. And if they aren't able to retain them, they're going to have some money to play with. And we'll see what they do here when the free agent window opens on July 1st.
You know, I want to ask you about that, but first, can you give me a Vancouver perspective on that Stanley Cup final? Because you went to Game 7 against the Oilers as it was, right? Like, how are Canucks fans looking at what happened in that series?
A lot of love for Roberto Luongo, and you can understand why. And it was reciprocated. You saw Bobby Lou when he got his hands on the cup, and in his interview on the ice, talked about all the people in Vancouver that have followed him and supported him. Still a wildly popular figure here in Vancouver. Got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup back in 2011. Didn't get it right, but a lot of people here happy to see him finally get his hands on the cup. Oliver Ekman-Larsson's just a fascinating story. A year ago, bought out, gets his $20 million to move on. The Canucks didn't think that he had it in him, at least not as a top pairing defenseman, but there's still life in Oliver Ekman-Larsson. There was a role for him and a great pickup by the Florida Panthers. And you think back early in the season when they were without Ekblad and without Montour, that guy played a ton and played well for them and then sort of settled into his role. And Gustav Forsling was a Canucks draft pick, a fifth rounder back in 2014, one that got away clearly. He also got away from Chicago and Carolina, but there were a lot of people here watching his rise in the National Hockey League and thinking, oh man, wouldn't Gustav Forsling look awfully good on the Vancouver Canucks blue line?
Right. I'm sure they're in Philly and Columbus are saying the same thing about Bob.
For sure.
It's sports. It is what it is. So you talked about the week ahead for the Canucks, the draft, and then free agency. So how is the Canucks next year going to look compared to this past season in your mind? And what are their draft needs? I know that's a big question, but I'm just going to throw it at you and let you go with it.
Well, I'll just say the draft is almost an afterthought. They don't have a first or a second rounder. They're going to be sitting there twiddling their thumbs on their phones until the 93rd pick in the third round. That's when they get into action, and they only have 5 picks in this draft. So I'm not expecting a lot from them, and I'm not expecting them to be active on the trade front to move back into the draft. I think their focus is on what's to come beyond the draft, and that is free agency. And here we are getting down to the 11th hour. It looks like Elias Lindholm is going to test free agency, so he's not going to be back. They paid a fair price, including this year's first rounder, to get him from Calgary. He was good in the playoffs, but turns out that he's just going to be a rental. Nikita Zadorov, another player that they picked up from the Flames earlier in the season. Love affair here with the fan base and the way that he played in the playoffs. He was terrific. You don't find 6'6", 235-pound mobile defenseman just around the corner, so they've got one, but he's a free agent, and if the Canucks can't meet his needs, he's going to test the market as well. Dakota Joshua was a nice pickup a couple of years ago, late bloomer, big power forward, would have scored 20 if he hadn't been hurt for 18 games, and a big part of their penalty kill. Like, he'll get some traction on the open market as well, and I'm not sure that the Canucks are going to be able to retain him. And so, these are their issues that, look, they won 50 games, 109 points. They won the Pacific Division in the regular season, but they're in a division with the Edmonton Oilers. They're in a division with the Vegas Golden Knights. And so it's always going to be difficult. You know how competitive the Golden Knights are. Certainly you, of all people, have been following them since their inception, Rod. They're not going to take lightly to getting punted in the first round of the playoffs. And so something tells me that they'll be busy here in the offseason, and the Oilers aren't going anywhere. And in fact, they may be more motivated than ever now to do what Florida did, which was get to the final and then get back there and get it right the second time around. So as much fun as it was here in Vancouver, a lot of guys had career years. That's going to be tough to replicate. That's a bit of a fool's game if you bank on all your guys having career years every single season. And so, the core group's in place. Quinn Hughes is probably going to win the Norris here this week. Thatcher Demko, if he's healthy, can be a difference maker in goal. Big question around Elias Pedersen and the way that his season ended, because he was disappointing and they've committed to him. His new contract kicks in the fall, $11.6 million per season. You're expecting star level performance from a player like that. And then JT Miller. So they've got nice pieces here. There's no question. They should be competitive, but Can they raise the stakes off a 50-win, 109-point season? That's not going to be easy. And so big questions here about what they're going to do with this money they've got to play with. Jake Gensel's on their list, but Jake Gensel's going to get his money wherever he goes. He's going to be a hot commodity here in free agency. And so I don't know if the Canucks are going to be able to do enough to convince him to come north of the border and call Vancouver his home for the next bunch of years.
Why I think you've had the longevity you've had is you don't pander to the Canucks. Like, I enjoy the objectivity of what you say. And pretty much everything you've said the last couple of years has come true, But is that the toughest one of the toughest divisions in the NHL? Like Seattle, who knows what they're going to be? San Jose is not going to be good. And who knows about Anaheim? And the Flames aren't even in their own market. They're not expected to make the playoffs, right? The rebuild has started, but that is still a tough division at the top. Is it the toughest in the NHL, do you think?
I think you could make a strong argument because we haven't even talked about the Los Angeles Kings. They were there were 400-plus point teams. Vegas was the wild card in the mix, which tells you something because Vegas, even through its injuries, had a pretty good run. And if they had been healthy, who knows where they ultimately would have finished. But yeah, I mean, any division that has 400-point teams at the top, that's high rent district. And again, I don't think that a whole lot's going to change in that regard. I don't know if the Canucks get back to 109 points, but there's no reason to think that they can't push 100 points with the core group that they've got as long as they stay healthy. And the job that Rick Tocchet did, already named Coach of the Year, he was terrific for the Vancouver Canucks. His systems are in place, and so I think they know who they are and what they are. Now it's about filling around the edges of that core that I mentioned. And again, they've got a wish list like every team going to free agency, but there's not enough star power to go around, and we'll see ultimately if the Canucks can land their big fish here when the window opens.
When Travis Green was hired in Ottawa, we had you on that day and you analyzed it. And I want to ask you this. What about the moves since, including acquiring Linus Ullmark last night? Fascinating interview with Brent Wallace this morning on NHL radio saying Gary Bettman's going to be mad they dropped this trade on the night of Game 7. Thoughts on the timing of it, and B, what it means for what they're doing with the Senators in this new group there?
Yeah, I like the move. I think Linus Ullmark's proven that he's a top puck stopper in the National Hockey League. And when you got goaltending, Rod, at any level of hockey, you get goaltending, you got a chance. So I'm sure Travis Green delighted. They've just had that roller coaster, merry-go-round of goalies that haven't been able to give them saves in Ottawa. They've got such a good young nucleus there. And now it's a question of, again, support. Like, you can have all the young talent. The Oilers are perfect proof of that for the last decade. You can have, the best players in the world, but if it was about just having the two best players, Oilers would win the cup every year. It's not. You got to surround your talent, and it feels like Edmonton has finally learned that lesson. Ottawa, I'm not comparing them to Edmonton, but maybe where the Oilers were 6 or 8 years ago. But I like what the Senators have in terms of the good young talent. Big fan of Tim Stützle. Give me all the Kachucks on my team anytime you can. And Brady's a gamer. And then they've got other good. Drake Batherson's a really good player. Shane Pinto has shown that he's a good player. They've got nice pieces there. So I'm really curious to see the job that Travis Green's going to do second go around as a full-time head coach, not the interim label that he had in Jersey. And I would say that Steve Stais is off to a pretty good start acquiring one of the better goaltenders that was out there on the market. And again, you give me a goaltender that can just stabilize things. That's a team that now has a chance, I think, to start gaining some traction.
Great update, Jeff. Thank you. Enjoy whatever you can of summer. I don't think there is one in the NHL anymore, but that's a good thing for guys like you. Thanks for the time, man.
Always great, Roddy. Thanks.
Jeff Paterson joining us from RinkWide Vancouver, and take care of us in Pride.